You're listening to Impulse to Innovation. The Institution of Mechanical Engineers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Helen Mees. As a global community of mechanical engineers with over 120,000 members in 140 countries, the Institution of Mechanical Engineers has been at the heart of the engineering profession since 1847. The institution's mission is to improve the world through engineering by sharing the latest news, views and insight into the creative world of technology and the people that make it happen. In this month's episode, we are focusing on the brewing and distilling industry, which is part of the hygienic process industry sector. This sector covers industries such as food, pharma and biotech. Brewing and distillation have been part of our way of life for over a millennia, with the earliest records of both processes being found in Mesopotamia. If you're interested in finding out more about brewing and distillation, I've added some links into the episode notes. While the methods of both brewing and distilling have largely remained unchanged over time, refinements to the processes by which the raw ingredients are handled and combined has resulted in a multitude of flavours and colours of both alcoholic and now non-alcoholic drinks. Despite the unprecedented impact on the global hospitality sector as a result of the COVID pandemic, appetite for beers and spirits remains strong. Today's brewing and distilling manufacturers rely on a raft of complex technologies covering raw materials handling, production and waste handling. In each of these, accurate control of product flow is essential to ensure the final product quality is consistently high. This requires multidisciplinary teams covering chemistry, biology and even agriculture to ensure products reach the market in a consistent and safe way for the consumer. But where does the engineer come into this? Well, process optimization and increased efficiency have been a priority for many brewing and distilling companies over recent decades, and process engineers have been central to those improvements, developing technologies such as online process control, in-place cleaning, and energy recovery from steam or fermentation, as well as gaining a greater understanding of fluid flows. Even before a brewery or distillery is built, the engineers are working to understand the requirements, such as grain capacity, the size and number of cookers and fermenters, and the type of still in the case of distilling, as well as the basic piping design and sizing. And most important of all, electrical and mechanical engineers determine the power requirements for conveyors to move the grain, mills for grinding, agitators for cooking, fermenters and beer tubs, as well as the countless pumps and motors that move the fluids throughout the facility. It's safe to say that we wouldn't be able to imbibe our favourite tipple today without the input of process engineers. My guests today are George Crombie, Engineering Director of Briggs of Burton. He is responsible for all engineering and automation activities at Briggs and has worked on a number of high-profile global projects across brewing, distilling, spirit storage and packaging, both in foods and pharmaceuticals. George is a Fellow of the IMechE and a member of the Institute of Brewing and Distilling. Marina Ferreira is a chemical engineer. She is a technical specialist and laboratory manager in the food and beverage division at PAL Corporation. Marina is passionate about craft brewing and is a home brewer herself. In her work, she develops methods for filtering brewing products for her customers to enable them to create new and improved products. I started by asking George about his route into process engineering and his role as engineering director. George, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you on the show. In my introduction, I talked about the history of process engineering, and the company you work for has some real history behind it, hasn't it? It was founded in 1732 and is one of the oldest process engineering companies in the world. That's some serious history, right?
Yeah, no, it's impressive. We've been in Burton-on-Trent, home of brewing, ever since then, really servicing the needs of breweries, and then latterly that's changed into distilleries as well.
Yeah, it's a fantastic history to be kind of part of, I suppose. And as a young engineer, what really got you interested in the whole process industry, and why specifically did you go into kind of the brewing and distilling industry specifically?
It's been a long journey, I guess, really. Right from when I was a child, I've been always interested in tinkering things with things and doing engineering topics, really. So at school, there was quite a lot of STEM activities, and I was also lucky enough that my dad was also an engineer. So he was chief engineer at Green King, one of the big regional
Ah, right,
brewers
yeah.
in East Anglia. So there was quite a few weekends and things when I used to go in with him, see some of the big crane lifts going in when they were putting in vessels and things like that, which then led on from there to me having a real interest and passion for engineering. Moving on through education and then getting some work experience with Briggs, the company I work for. For now, it's a common route for engineers for us as a company, bringing people all the way through from work experience or apprentices or graduates through from there, really, and then just working my way through the ranks to where I am today, which is taken me to lots of interesting places, challenging projects all over the world, really, from Mexico to China to the US. So it's been a great journey, really interesting. And it's just nice to work in the industry. There's a lot of really good atmosphere and passion amongst all the people in it, really.
Yeah, it sounds like your route's very similar to mine with that father figure who kind of led you into the profession, and it's always really nice to hear. But I'm really interested to find out more about your role as engineering director and what that involves and how you get involved in some of these big projects.
Well, it's an incredibly varied role, really. So we're not a huge company as part of it. So working in any sort of, I guess, large SME, really, it can be quite varied. And I'm basically responsible for all of the engineering activities at Briggs. Whether that be in our stainless steel or copper manufacturing workshops, where we're building some of the equipment and the stills for distilleries, we're handcrafting those, or all of the design and engineering, the process engineering work that we do to develop the schemes and the designs for the projects that we then go on to construct around the world. Every day is varied, as I say, different clients, different locations, different problems that we have on projects. There's definitely no project that ever goes through without any hiccups as part of it, and that sort of influences every single day, really, of what we do.
Yeah, I think as engineers, that's a kind of natural thing. Is every day is different, isn't it? And it's always going to be a challenge. Now, for some of our listeners, the idea of having mechanical engineers working in brewing and distilling might be quite a strange one, but the amount of technology that goes into a modern day distillery is pretty significant. And I'm guessing we could say that the industry couldn't function without it these days. So what kinds of technologies would we expect to see in a modern brewery or distillery?
So you're firstly, really, I think you're absolutely right. There's technology everywhere in a distillery, whether it's the basic technology of pumps, valves, heat exchangers, and all of the things that we need to move the liquids and solids around any of the processes that we're doing. But as we are responsible as engineers from taking the grain that comes in, taking it all the way through to effectively the glass that it goes in. So whether that be the initial processing through to the storage, the packaging of all of these things, there's really unique challenges throughout the whole process that we find. And really, I guess the two areas of technology really feature either about making better quality products or in a better way and meeting what the needs of the customer is, or more importantly, probably at the moment, is around the energy saving and the carbon neutrality, sustainability aspects of the projects we're doing. But it all starts listening to the customer to understand what they want, and that's very different for each of the sectors and each of the customers that we work with, really. Automation's a big thing. Obviously, has been a big thing for many years, and really see it coming to the fore. We've just had, obviously, during the pandemic and things, really using that technology and automation to help us remotely startup plants even now. So we've been commissioning projects now on the other side of the world where we haven't been able to fly engineers to it. Which is something which is a bit of a first for us. Yes, we always used to design things remotely and work with our customers remotely, but never had we commissioned things remotely before. The technology actually in the process, looking at decarbonising plants for our customers at the moment, really big thing at the moment, and that consists of either using some of the co-products that are produced in these distilleries or breweries to perhaps run the boilers as part of it, perhaps provide an alternative fuel source in a biomass boiler or something like that, or just simply the reuse of energy, the storage of hot water. There's a lot of hot water generated in brewing and distilling that you've got to find uses for, so you don't just put it down the drain. And then being able to take that hot water sometimes and put in other technologies that recycle it. So we use a lot of thermal vapor recompression or high temperature heat pumps in our projects to recycle that energy and to get to plants that are designed to be carbon neutral completely. That's the aim, and that's where we want to get all of the plants to in the coming years.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you a bit more about that. I read with quite a lot of interest about the work that your company had been doing in the biofuels industry. So you're using your long history of process engineering to create a commercialized bioethanol plant using fermented products and waste materials. Is this crossover from the long established brewing and distilling industry into renewable processes? Is this something that we're going to see more of in the future?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. It's a trend that we've seen a lot of in the past, and we've been working with some of the biggest names in oil and gas really as they move into this, or have been moving into this sector over recent years. These guys are great at building big oil and gas installations, but what they've never had to get used to before is handling a living organism. So during the fermentation process, but that's what we've been doing every day for years, designing our plants to be hygienic. Really, that's the name of the game, to be able to be cleaned in place, CIP'd, and to keep the plant hygienic. So that can be from helping to select the right equipment, which is hygienic without dead legs, and is hygienic by design, through to designing the plant to be CIPable. A different scale from what we've been doing for breweries and distilleries, certainly. So suddenly moving up to significantly larger vessels, equipment, which provides its own challenges that we've had to learn to get around. But it's been a really interesting transition, and it couples our skills and expertise that we've honed for many years with that from the oil and gas sector, which is a very different set of skills. But ultimately, it brings a really good project.
Yeah, it's fascinating, really, to hear that long history back to the 1700s. The brewers and distillers back then would not be thinking that you'd be working with oil and gas organizations to develop similar technology to what they were trying to develop back in those days. It's fascinating to think about that. Now, the competition, I suppose, between the large food and beverage companies is obviously pretty fierce, with a growing need for optimizing process, and particularly, as you pointed out, things like efficiency and sustainability. So how are you and your engineers developing new technologies to help keep your clients really ahead of the competition?
So there's always a lot of heritage in everything we're doing. So brewing and distilling, all of our clients want to look back at their heritage, and they want to make sure that the products that they're producing are still as good as they always have been, or if not even better. So whenever we're looking at this for people, we're always taking that into account and listening to them to find out what they actually want to do. But what we also do with a lot of our customers is we run brewery of the future or distillery of the future events, which allow these blue sky workshops to sort of take place, which our engineers love doing because it's a great way for them to develop their skills and really think outside the box. It involves us joining lots of different, maybe emerging technologies sometimes, but also joining sort of the standard go-to technologies together in the best way possible to produce the best factory for that location. And it could be different wherever it is in the world. It might be a water stretched area where it's all about trying to get water savings, not so much about energy. It could be both of those coupled together in different locations. And it's that for our engineers here, and for me, it's that sometimes you can take real bleeding edge technologies and try and integrate them into projects, and sometimes you're just trying to use the everyday technologies that are out there to enhance what you're doing. And it's not just about that as well. When you go to the supermarket now, what do you look for there? Do you look for just one type of beer or one type of whiskey, say? Or actually, are you expecting to see a whole range? A few years ago, it was one, you might have 3 or 4 different types of lagers from the big players. Now it's 3 or 4 from every single player there. So it's now trying to change these facilities that were built 10 years ago to design them for what they call late product differentiation. So to be able to produce lots of different types of products from there, which is involving new technologies like late hopping in a beer to provide that hoppiness to it later in the process, so they can produce these craft products at a wide and varied scale as part of it. That's the biggest trend we're seeing at the moment, which again makes it really interesting because you're working at every single end of the scale as well.
Yeah, I would suspect the big companies as well are looking, as you rightly said, to compete with some of these smaller craft brewery style sort of short run batches of beers or spirits, and want to have that flexibility within their equipment. So I'm guessing you're doing a lot to kind of provide them with processes that can switch very quickly from one product to another.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's got to be about being able to produce multiple different products from the same line. Now, we did a food factory recently making canned ready meals, actually, that was all about being able to produce. I can't remember how many exact lines it was, but in the hundreds of different product lines out of the same piece of equipment, and being able to handle that, and some of the interesting challenges you get in things like that of being able to pump whole lumps of potato so that they come through in your curry without being mashed potato as part of it, is something that is a really interesting challenge to get around. Involves lots of trials to make sure you can do it and not damage the particles within it and things. It's some interesting challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. It must be quite a difficult thing to try and get not just liquids, but kind of, semi-liquid materials into these things without them getting jammed up and stuff. But I guess pumping is quite a challenge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, hydraulic design of the plants that we produce. I mean, it's everything we're dealing with somewhere along the line is a liquid as part of it. So it's key to what we do here at Briggs in designing what we do and making sure that's as efficient as possible, and also making sure the quality's there and we're not damaging and degrading the products that we're producing.
Yeah, some serious challenges there for engineers, I think, in the future as food choices and drink choices change. And that sounds like it's going to be a real challenge for you and your team. George, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to me. It's been fascinating. I think we could probably talk for quite a number of hours on this subject, not just on kind of the brewing and distilling side, but also on the food and beverage industry as a whole. But it's been a real insight into what you do on a daily basis, and just seeing the involvement that engineers have in this process. So thanks very much for joining me.
No, thanks for having me.
Marina, thank you so much for joining me today. Real pleasure to have you on the show. You come from a chemical engineering background, don't you? So yeah. What drew you into a career in brewing and distilling?
Also, sit, because there is a whole story on that. But first of all, we have to think that I'm Brazilian, as you probably had said in the intro. And in Brazil, we absolutely love partying. Like anything is an excuse for a barbecue. So in any gathering of our family or in any friend soiree, there is always something to drink. You always have something. And I'm a chemical engineer. And when I first joined the university, I tried to brew my own beer and my own mead with some friends. Of course, it didn't taste great because I was unaware of all the parameters that are needed for a proper brewing, but we tried. And it was a great excuse just to see each other in the weekend. So we tried, different recipes, trying to put Brazilian fruits on the mead. So it was like an awesome excuse, and I discovered the world of the craft beers. Because in 2010, there was a big craft beer boom in Brazil. And I finally managed to experiment all the beers that I only heard about. So I experiment IPAs, stouts, and I fell in love with this world, with the brewing world. And in Brazil, when you do the chemical engineering, university degree, you're kind of pushed to work towards the oil and gas industry. And to graduate, you have to do a 6-month internship. However, I did my internship at an AB InBev brewery house, and I did a job rotation, and I learned a lot about everything that is related to the brewing world. Not only doing the beer per se, but also the logistics of receiving the barley, the wheat, the logistics of how to store, all of the ingredients, how you can actually produce, and you have to do in different parts, how you're going to move everything in a big factory, what is up in the packaging world as well, because you can do the beer, okay, but when you have to put it into a can is a completely different world. And on top of that, I also had to learn about health and safety. I had to learn about even the human resources, because we had to talk with the operators. So this is how I started, from this oil and gas background as a chemical engineer into the food and beverage world. However, after I graduated, I landed on a job for a raw material supplier company. So I kept in the food industry world. And this company supply, several raw materials such as cocoa powder, whey protein, milk, flavorings, colorings, to the big manufacturers of cake, bread, ice cream, snacks. And it was so interesting because every day I was learning. I learned how to actually put a flavoring on a potato chips. And it's such an interesting topic of conversation, with the family and with the friends. And also, it's a good showing off, to your old uncle that has several bottles of whiskey on his shelf. And you come there like, hey, uncle, do you know the bourbon is not a proper whiskey, as the Scottish people do it. And it becomes an amazing topic of conversation in the family meetings. And when I moved here in the UK, I started working as a technical specialist for a company that produces industrial filters for the food and beverage world. So, for example, we make filters to filter beer, wine, whiskey, but also oils, dairy, flavorings as well. So, any day I learn more and more, not only about brewing and distilling, which is the topic of this podcast, but we are actually learn a lot about everything related to the food, to the food world. And when I first joined this company and I first started visiting the customers, I was baffled in a good way. It was so incredible to see that so many women and so many foreigners as myself were working on this area. So because of that, I was encouraged every day to be, my authentic self, this Brazilian chit chatter that jumps around and throws confetti to the air and talks with absolutely everyone and has, no sense of personal space. But this is what made, me special on my work. And because of that, I'm making myself sing. This is an example. For example, I was invited for this podcast. So hooray! And because of that, I every day I'm encouraged to do my best work, to do the best work possible. And also you ask, what drew myself to this career, and I have to say what is keeping myself in this career in the brewing distilling world is that I love my job, because I'm in close contact with not only the big breweries but also the craft ones. And it's so interesting because every day I'm learning about the new production trends, what are the new machinery that they are using, what are the novel products. And I travel, all around the UK and Europe as well, because I'm a technical specialist. So I go to the customer site to try and fix. My friends have this joke that I am your IT guy that goes to your house and fix your Wi-Fi router, but for the food industry. So I go there, I visit the customers, and I fix their problems. And it's funny, like, and as I said before, I really like this job because since I every day go to a different factory, my work never gets boring because I always have something to fix. I always have like a problem to solve, a new challenge to overcome. So, for example, today I may try and filter this cider who has been, adding a wheat sort of sugar to it, and we have to remove the haze. But tomorrow I may try and remove wax from citrus oils. And in the next day, I may try and remove visible particles from sugar. So every day is something new, and my days are always fun and interesting. So if you are a new engineer and you don't know, which area you like to go, definitely the food and beverage world and the brewing, the distilling is something really interesting.
That's awesome. I'm just totally overwhelmed by your complete passion for the subject, and the fact that it kind of comes from from that sort of family background and stuff. I was talking to George earlier on, and he was saying, what got him interested in brewing was his father was in the industry, and he kind of came through that way. So there's clearly that sort of Brazilian kind of drive and
Yes.
passion for it. But let's just talk briefly, kind of on a more serious note. These days, the food and beverage industry is really heavily regulated, and with health and safety as well as environmental regulations being at the forefront. And you've touched on that in what you were saying before. How important are these requirements in the brewing process itself, and what role do they play in the work that you do as a technical specialist and a laboratory manager?
Well, I have to start this answer with a very sad news, unfortunately. So, in Brazil, 2 days ago, a mechanical died after he fell into a burger machine, and
Oh
this
wow.
burger machine had the security lock removed. And this happened in a very well established meat product making company in Brazil. And we always think that it's never going to happen with me. But look
Yeah.
at what happened. Someone unfortunately died because the safety measures were not, attended to. So risks are genuine, risks are real. We should pay attention to them. So we have to do, our risk assessments. You have to pay attention to our safe systems of work. And as you may imagine, for both the brewing and the distilling world, we handle, very hot liquids that are inside very hot pieces of equipment and very hot pieces of pipeline, or they are stored in pressure vessels, as you said. Imagine handling a distilling column. You have to really pay attention. How is the pressure inside it? What are you taking off? What are you putting in? We handle also machines that have, like a conveyor belt. And if you don't pay attention, the conveyor belt can convey you to someone. So, sorry, to
Yeah.
somewhere. So we deal with all of these filling machines and all sorts of apparatus that can cause harm if misused. But not only that, we also deal with harsh chemicals. Imagine you doing, 50,000 liters of beer. Of course, you have to use a lot of chemicals, a lot of caustic, a lot of acids to clean everything. And you can do like the production in the next day, knowing that no cross contamination will happen from a pathogen. So we handle these equipment, and you also handle the chemical compounds. So it is unfortunately a work that has a lot of risk. And we as technical specialist people, we must do the induction every time that we go to a new customer, because we have to be aware of what are the risks that that company is giving to me, so I can protect myself, and not only protect myself, but I can also protect the others that are around me. So, for example, if the area is 8x risk rated, what you can do to mitigate, right? Can you close the tanks? Can you put an exhauster on top of the factory so these fumes are not, in contact with the operators? Or, for example, if you handle any sort of chemical, can you not? Can you put inside an automated system? We have to pay attention to all of these because these will definitely make our work, more safe. Health and safety, a good risk assessment, all of these are crucial for a proper way of working. And we have to remember that they got even more critical after the pandemic, because are the health and safety people who prepared the workplace, who prepared the associate for the COVID challenges that appeared, and even more so with my area, because brewers and distillers, they are considered essential workers. We had to go to work every day when not furloughed. So for these people who had to go to work every day, because of course we were at home, of course we would want to drink beer, and we know that the beer sales increased via like online selling. So we had to keep working, and for that we had to pay attention to the safety person to say like, oh, use this, use that, use this face mask, please keep 2 meters apart, only two people can be on the same room, all of these rules. So health and safety is absolutely paramount. And last thing that I have to say is that environmental health and safety is such a passion of mine that I recently got a contractor national safety group safety passport. So
Excellent.
I've been trained on all sorts of risks that may happen in a construction site or in a food factory site. And this happens on my laboratory manager role as well. Because since I'm the manager of the lab, I have to pay attention on what is going on, what are we doing, what are our activities, and how I can establish a safe system of work, how I can do my risk assessment based on that, and how I can, for example, do my cost regulations, which are for the chemicals that are high risky that sometimes we use in our labs.
Obviously, as engineers, we work in some very difficult locations, and we were talking before about the fact that I'd worked in the oil and gas industry, and the process of distillation of crude and so on, very similar in terms of what you're doing in the sort
Yeah.
of brewing and distillation side of things, and all of those risks, you're constantly watching out for, not just for each other, but for making sure that there are safe working practices all the time. So it sounds like there is a lot in common with many heavy industries that we wouldn't necessarily associate with the beverage making industry. So it's quite interesting to hear about. Now, I want to bring you back to something that's obviously very a big passion of yours, which is the craft brewing and the micro brewing. They have become extremely popular and very commercially viable in the last 10 years. And I know you mentioned that they were incredibly popular in Brazil. Are there any differences in the way that the brewing processes work compared to the kind of the big commercial processes? And what sort of are the differences in terms of coming back to the health and safety, but also in the processes of brewing and distilling themselves?
So I'm passionate because I do home brewing. So I brew my own kombucha. I'm currently brewing my own meads as well. And when you're just trying to start a hobby after the pandemic started, so I just started to read some books like, hey, how can I do it? Okay, just grab some honey, just put some yeast, bada bing, bada boom. Bob's your uncle. Here you have it, a mead. However, when you come to a small craft brewery, for example, first of all, you have, let's say, 1,000 liters to process. So you have to pay attention on what is the amount of energy that is required to heat up the water, and what is the water temperature that is crucial for the yeast implementation, and what is the flow rate that you have to use to get from this tank to another tank. So all of the things that we see in university, all of the mechanical of fluid movement. I can only remember the name of the things in Portuguese now, apologies, but all the rules of thermodynamics and in like transport phenomena, we use these on our small craft breweries, and we use these on the big breweries. So it's interesting because even if you are a mechanical engineer, you study that, so you can apply all of these in the brewing world, and you can do your home brew itself, at home. And but main difference, it is usually the type of equipment that is used and obviously the size of this equipment. Here in the UK, the craft brewers, they are usually more manual because it's more cheap. Sometimes the customer, the craft brewers don't have the proper capex to buy big equipment, so they buy second-hand tanks and they buy second-hand pumps, and they sometimes they, oh, can you borrow me this hose pipe from another craft brewer that is literally next to it. It's funny because in London right now there is a mead brewery and a sake brewery that are like literally one next to the other, and I follow them on social media, and I keep seeing them say like, oh, today I borrowed 50 kilos of watermelon from them. So even the raw materials, you can have this kind of exchange with your colleagues, but normally everything is heavily manual. So they have small handheld machines, for example, for bottling. Usually there is like few people that do absolutely everything in the factory. Another example, a friend of mine that is working on this brewery back in Brazil, he does absolutely everything. So he goes to the production site, he actually brews the beer, he cleans the tank, he supervises production, he is the manager of the other people who work there, he's also the maintenance mechanical person. So it is interesting to work in small companies because you learn a lot very fast, because normally you have to do absolutely everything. And the real big companies, like the real big breweries and distillers right now, they are a beautiful thing to see. It's like a sword for tired eyes. And I love a shiny thing. I love something that is, that is glowy and colorful and beautiful. So imagine you entering in a company and you see this mechanical arm, this robot carrying the beer kegs around and picking up, placing, putting the label. It is completely hypnotizing. It is amazing. For real, if you have the opportunity to visit a brewery or a cidery or some distiller, I highly recommend because it's magical. But also you can have absurdly big filling machines. Imagine doing like 50,000 cans per hour, and this machine is like a carousel that goes very fast round and round, and again it's very hypnotizing. And usually on these big companies everything is automated now, so to clean all the pipelines they just press a button, in the SCADA system, and there's it. The CIP starts automatically. All the valves are controlled remotely, and so on. So they really apply the automation and the control on their factories, and they are pushing some innovations. So on my company, for example, there is a cross flow filtration system, and now there is a cell phone app that you can use to turn it on, turn it off, see what is entering, see what is leaving, and calculate what was the volume, process, what was the yield, what is the temperature of the water that is necessary to clean white wine versus the temperature that is required to clean a red wine that has more tannins and hence needs more caustic. So is interesting how we are looking at the process in a more holistic way, so we can guarantee that everything that we're going to produce is going to be delicious and is going to be produced with the highest efficiency possible. But regarding of all these differences, I have to say as well that all companies, small and big ones here in the UK, they really pay attention to the associates' well-being and the associate safety even more in this pandemic.
It's interesting to hear you talk about those differences, because it's that bringing together of kind of the art of brewing and distilling with the science of brewing and distilling, isn't it? And you see these beautiful copper vessels that are hand made by engineers, for just purely for making whiskey. And to me, and I think to you as well, that they are pieces of artwork as well as functional pieces of equipment. It's so nice to know that regardless of whether you're in this sort of the big companies producing hundreds of thousands of cans a week, or whether you're one of these smaller batch brewers, that that artistry and science kind of still come together to create this really fantastic drink. I think that's great. Now, as it's one of the oldest, I suppose, a biochemical process, would you say, known to society, it's certainly one that humans have had the most success in exploiting over the millennia. How do you see technology developing within the brewing and distilling industry over the coming years? And what role are engineers going to play in the process of that innovation? What sort of innovations do you think are going to appear in the future?
I have to say that there are three sorts of innovation. First, in innovation of products per se. Second, in innovations of flavors. And third, innovations of how the products are produced. And why I say that. Let's go back to what you said just a moment ago about having something very interesting and different things to drink. I am a big mead fan. This is why I do homebrew. But I also am a big mead fan from other companies. So I follow them on social media. There is a mead club that I'm part of, that every month I receive a different mead at my home. They did, this watermelon flavor, and every month comes something that I never thought about before. And probably if you go nowadays to the supermarkets, you're going to see that there is not only normal whiskey, but there is rye whiskey, honey whiskey, apple whiskey, whiskey with lime, whiskey with passion fruit. And we love a novelty. So we love new products. And it's again baffling that the amount of information we don't know about innovating products. We don't know. And if you look at over the millennia, people probably didn't know as well. So imagine nowadays if you have the opportunity to grab a time machine and bring back a Belgian monk, a British tea maker, an American bourbon lover, and like a hippie person. So imagine telling this Belgian monk that in 2014 there was a boom in sour beers and in flavored beers. Imagine telling this Belgian monk, like, hey, in some years from now, you can actually drink strawberry beer. How is that? Also, imagine telling this British gin maker that in 2018, the product would have a bounce back after decades of declining, only because berries, chilies, fruits, and colorings were being added to them. And also because now the package is pretty and you want to keep as a piece of decoration in your house. Or even tell an American bourbon lover that in 2020, last year, hard seltzers were the trendy summer beverage. It's just a sparkling water with alcohol and flavorings. Imagine that. Like, people would never think of that perhaps 5, 10 years ago. Or even to this hippie person that in 2021, CBD oil is being used to make functional sparkling water so you can relax after a day of work, and it's being legalized now. So I really think that the innovation can come from any sort of engineering, not just mechanical engineering, not just chemical engineering. But I can give some examples. So, chemists, not engineers, but chemists, they are creating liquid hop flavors. You don't need to use the hop. They're just making the flavoring. They deliver the bottle to you, and you add to your mash, and then that's it. You have a beer. Biotechnologists, they are nursing new yeast strains and new, acidobacteria strains to make different sour beers, to make different, bock beers. So just by using different yeast, not only the Saccharomyces cerevisiae that is the yeast that everyone knows that makes beer, you can create a completely different product. Or that computational engineers, they are using machine learning to improve production efficiency. As someone was saying on the season 2, episode 6, if I'm not mistaken, of the Imposter Innovation podcast, they were talking about machine learning, and machine learning is being used on the food and beverage world as well, not only for oil and gas or for the for cars industry. It's been used here as well. Also, mechanical engineers, they are making more modern and safe machineries for us. Sales engineers are connecting the producers and the customers with this end-to-end way of working. So, for example, my company does filters, right? However, I need to speak with the flavoring company and with the beer company that they're going to talk to each other in the end, because I know that it's not only worth it to filter the beer and filter the flavoring, because if I add them, they're going to be hazy and I have to filter them again, right? It's not efficient. So right now the sales engineering are working in this end-to-end way of doing things, and it's absolutely fantastic. Also, the chemical engineers, they are designing more safe and efficient brewing distilling equipment, such as vacuum distillers, as they have here on the Cambridge Distilling Gin Company. It's considered like one of the most modern distilleries in the world because they use this vacuum distilling technology. Try it. I'm not being sponsored. I'm just a fan. Also, environmental engineers are designing technologies to recycle water, to recycle the CIP wastes. Or, for example, when you're making beer, you have the grains, right? The grains usually are used to feed the cows, as a cattle feeding. However, nowadays companies are grabbing these grains waste and making forks and knives. So instead of you using plastic forks and knives, you can use these and you can eat after. And automating engineers are making these modern, intelligent, and shining factories. So I really think that there's innovation possibility in all fields of engineering, but not only on the fields. As engineers, we have to innovate ourselves as well, because in the upcoming years, we not only have to be engineers per se, but we have to be people's leaders. We have to be production managers. We have to be inventors. We have to be good colleagues, and we have to be good people in the end.
I think that is an awesome thing to end our absolutely amazing interview on. I am so excited to think about what is going to happen in the future. I remember when some of those first flavoured Alco Pops came out in the, dare I say it, 90s, and was so excited about those, but never really thought about the engineering that went into the back of it. So you've got me really thinking, Marina, about the way the future might be and I won't pour my gin in quite the same way in the future.
That's great.
Thank you very, very much for sharing your incredible passion about this subject, and I hope it's been a huge inspiration to anyone who's listening today. So thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, I say thank you. Thank you so much, Helen. And I dare say you may find me on LinkedIn. So you just type Marina Ferreira, Paul Corporation, you may find me. So you can approach me and ask any other questions that you have after this podcast. I'm going to be completely happy to answer. And again, Helen, thank you so much for the opportunity.
That's all for this month. In next month's show, we will be looking at sport and exercise, how sports equipment is designed, and the role engineers played during the Olympic Games. So don't forget to bring your running shoes. You've been listening to Impulse to Innovation, the Institution of Mechanical Engineers podcast. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear from you. So if you'd like to share any news or any feedback with us, then please email us podcast@IMechE.org. All the information on this episode can be found in the episode notes.